Welcome, everybody. This is Camille Grant here at Mayfield. Thank you so much for joining today. We're going to spend the next few minutes, next hour, talking a lot about generative AI. We know that there's a lot of conversation about it today. We know it's a topic that's probably front and center to many of your conversations inside of your organization. And so what we wanted to do is spend some time talking about it from a CXO perspective, as to where's the money going from an investor point of view. And Vijay Reddy will join here in a second to talk a little bit about his background, plus his perspective. He's new to Mayfield here now, how many months?
4 or 5 months.
5 months in, and he is leading our new AI Start Fund, which is a fascinating, highly focused seed fund that is generating all kinds of deal flow. So he'll talk a lot about that, where the money's going, and a little bit of a prediction as to how he thinks this market will evolve over time, because it is early innings in our view, which is why one of the reasons we're going in at a seed fund. And then after Vijay presents, he's got a half dozen slides or so. Isaac will join, and I got to know Isaac through some of the great work that he's been doing at StarCIO. He's a contributing author, editor, et cetera, to a number of different books and things. So I'll let him tell a lot more about himself, but he's got an amazing, very elegant way to describe how CIOs can be thinking about the market, and very tactical and practical ways to begin to evolve from early learning to full execution. And of course, we're going to do a lot of Q&A. So please use the chat bar here to ask questions, to propose ideas. Vijay, you're up. And he just stepped out. Vijay, you're on.
Hello. Hi, can you hear me?
Great. Yes, you're on.
All right. Gamil, can I share the screen or?
Yeah, I can stop share and then you can share on your own. And sorry, folks, we're having this weird problem that our internet went down here at Mayfield today, of all times, just 5 minutes before we kicked off. So both Vijay and I were sort of scrambling to get back online. So Vijay, please first introduce yourself and then take it away. And you've got, let's say, 15 minutes of content here. So
perfect. Hey all, nice meeting you. I'm new to the Mayfield family, as Gamil said. I've been here for a couple of months, and we announced a new fund as part of the Mayfield. It's the seed stage focused fund. It's the AI Start. And I think what I was going to talk to you today about was more along the lines of what we are seeing. And maybe before that, just a little bit about my journey in AI. I started investing in 2014. And the aha moment for me, as many of you have been around in 2014, 2015, was for the first time we had deep learning break some of the benchmarks with AlexNet, and then with audio, and then with text as well. And so this was the early innings of the deep learning era. And $1 trillion markets opened up in many different places, like autonomous vehicles, medical imaging, satellite imagery. And it was a 10-year investment period for a lot of investors. And I'm sure a lot of CXOs have been using AI for at least for the last 10 years with deep learning. And at my previous place where I used to be at Intel Capital, was able to invest across the stack, all the way from hardware to software accelerators to libraries, up the stack in a variety of companies. And so some observations which might be relevant to how we will see the next 10 years is the stack got really quickly abstracted away. You had to be an AI expert in 2014, both knowing algorithms and also hardware. And then comes along CUDA, and now you could write algorithms on top of CUDA. And with PyTorch and TensorFlow, you had one more layer of abstraction. And with MLOps, and then with Cloud, Vertex and SageMaker, eventually you could go to apps and write it. So you went from selling tools to data scientists to eventually citizen data scientists to analysts to business users, a variety of different products. And so we saw that the abstraction was very quick in the last 10 years, where from a core engineering perspective, it was interesting to see how different tools develop for different personas. And as some of you might know, we went from a lot of startups offering picks and shovels in the early days, some very, very specialized, to rapid consolidation quickly, and then end-to-end platforms emerged. And eventually a lot of the MLOps was being done at the cloud. And the question for us as we look at the next 10 years is, do we see a similar place where we'll see consolidation, or are we going to see a lot of unique components? Then there was the view of how do you look at AI from an AI-centric perspective to eventually a data-centric perspective. And it's a little bit nuanced in that several of our companies were AI-centric companies. And then when you actually start applying these models in real life, you quickly realize that maybe the models are not the right ones for the right use cases. And you had to switch to data-centric perspective. And it was a hard pivot for a lot of companies, but we eventually saw the transition happen. And the other interesting aspect, especially as investors for us, was is there room to disrupt an incumbent because they have really good channels, they have spent decades building the customer relationships. And it was very interesting to see that how newcomers could challenge some of the existing incumbents and be really good at disrupting their existing the legacy business models. And as we look at what GenAI can do, we have an open mind of where can startups disrupt the incumbents. It's fair game at this point. Like if you want to take on Salesforce or other large companies, it was very, very hard to do it before, but maybe there's some wedges within the markets where you can actually make inroads. And what we saw universally across the last 10 years was a lot of the AI first companies won. These were companies that had really good, not just technical teams, but had built the entire sales, marketing, even the board level to figure out how AI companies could win.
Hey, Vijay, there's a question here from Linda. Can you unpack a little bit more about what AI-centric means versus data-centric?
So
Linda, if you want to add to the question.
I think maybe I can take an example, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
One of our companies was building computer vision models, and they had ResNet and YOLO, and they built really, really good computer vision models with tens of thousands of data. And this model was one of the best models they could build for vision, especially for detecting scratches on cars. And when you actually went to apply this model in a factory where there's cars and it's coming out of supply chain and there's scratches, you quickly realize that the people who are actually annotating the scratches don't even know how to annotate the scratches because they're not AI experts. And then you have to go look at the use case and then figure out, maybe you need a model with small data. Maybe you need a model where you take into account how the data is collected at the field, and then you come back with a new model. So it was a lot of companies built a good hammer and they're looking for nails, and then you had to go and look at use cases and then figure out maybe the models have to be different given the data collection was different. So maybe that's an example, but we saw that looking at data first and then figuring out what to build after was a better approach for many companies. So as we look at AI 2.0, I think the aha moment for us was there was a survey in McKinsey which said that a lot of people expected that the advances we're seeing now is 10 years too soon than what we actually expected for a variety of different tasks. And the aha moment for us was when we looked at LLM, there was a lot of these emergent behaviors which we didn't expect. And as you can see here, this is a paper from OpenAI where the blue is GPT 3.5 and the green is GPT 4. And between 3.5 to 4, you went from a 10% bottom in the bar exam to top 10% of the bar exam. And a lot of these are overtrainings, but it is emblematic of like how AI can take tasks which are being done on the field and automate a lot of the cognitive tasks. And this was a big movement for us to see how different aspects, it was not just about math or coding, it was about language and understanding. And to us, getting to a point where you can do things on the field and go from repetitive tasks to cognitive tasks was a big aha moment, especially as we look at very large markets. And this is a study out of BCG, which basically confirms, or at least their mental model, that it's not AI is going to replace humans, it's humans using AI are going to be much more productive than humans not using AI by a wide margin. And as we look at different job functions, this was like another fallacy we saw was people looked at markets as what is a TAM for software and accounting. But the right way to look at it was what was the accounting TAM for humans? It could be 20 billion when the software TAM could have been like a few hundred million. So now we're seeing startups go after markets which have huge human capital and trying to augment humans with superpowers, what we call human square at Mayfield, and trying to help them become more productive and thereby increasing the margins and increasing the profitability of this company. So there's a lot of, we think, billion-dollar companies that can build in human-centric jobs.
Vijay, could you just spend a minute on that point? Because I think it's an interesting perspective for CXOs who are budgeting for what are the savings, what are the impacts of some generative AI components. And you're suggesting that the math, the TAM, the addressable market is no longer just the how many licenses or seats can I sell, but rather how much true impact to the business it has. Can you further explain that?
Yeah, so I invested in an accounting company and a translation company, which have maybe good examples, right? So if you look at the software for translation, it's not that much. Outside of Microsoft Translate and the enterprise translating budget might not be a whole lot, but if you actually look at the budget for words translated, in some companies it's $10 million. At my previous employer, it was a couple of $1 million just for translation, but most of this budget, at least half, would go into humans to translate. So a lot of startups stayed away from these kind of markets because the translation companies did not use a lot of software. But then if you become the translation company, you can get 50-60% margins, whereas a human translation startup could only do like 20-30%, right? So, and that's probably like a $20-30 billion business, a TAM for just translation. So now we can actually build billion-dollar companies in a very, very human driven marketplace, which doesn't have a lot of automation. So similarly, if we look at accounting software budgets is not that high, but it's a tens of billion-dollar business. And so what we're seeing startups do is they're starting to become the accounting companies themselves by using automation and AI. And that's very exciting for us as we look at new markets to get into, which previously have not been out of reach for venture-style returns. Yep. And to go after this market, as we look at Mayfield, we have a 5-stack looking at different aspects of the infrastructure and applications. And so we're investing across each aspect of this stack. So each one has its own unique issues and unique markets. And so we're investing heavily in copilots, we're investing in security, trust and safety, we're investing in data ops and security, also investing in what we call the picks and shovels of the MLOps space. So it's across different aspects of the stack. And we want to go in early. It's very exciting and also very challenging from a valuation standpoint, but we're a people-centric fund. And for us to go and partner with exceptional founders at the seed stage is our way of differentiating from the rest of the venture industry.
So there's a great question here from Teju about will people go the Reddit route? I don't know if you can see his question there, Vijay, but Teju, I turn on your mic if you want to ask your question directly.
Yeah, it's more about how as you mentioned, things going more data centric or data, let's say driving some of the innovation. So I was curious if now that most people have woken up to the fact that, hey, data is very critical for actually these applications, do you see that it's the incumbents' game to lose, as in the incumbents have the data, let's say, and to train these models, and in that scenario, are incumbents still at an advantage? And if they don't innovate, they lose. But otherwise, it's harder for some of the earlier disruptors to gain ground.
Yeah, so I think data has intuitively most enterprises know that data is the moat, and also most startups know that enterprise data is where they want to play. And so you see this friction, or at least like tension, between existing incumbents trying to get insights into their own data. And you see the startups where they're getting really, really smart about how do you get enterprise data. So offering a copilot, getting easy entry into an enterprise to get access to the data. And it's not just one source of data, it's combining this company A data with company B data. And that creates this very positive network effects, which it's typically, I would say, like incumbents have the data, they have some moat. But what we've seen, at least in the last many years, is they've not been very good at monetizing this data, right? I think the question for enterprises is how do you monetize this data, especially if you're thinking of building an LLM. We're seeing very interesting aspects where hospital chains or insurance companies are coming in and pooling the data in a very privacy-centric way, and then building large language models on top of this data. So that's one more question: is how do enterprises come together and try to build maybe industry-specific LLMs, or just use data in a very more productive way.
So is there a market for selling the knowledge to train these LLMs? Because eventually the value is in the knowledge, right? And then for LLMs, if you can't get it free on the internet at some point, right? Is there going to be an emerging market for that? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's been the holy grail for a long time, right? So in my previous company, we invested in a company called Here, which pulled data from all the automotive companies. And that was one model of how companies could pull their data. The question is, how do you get this working, right? In most cases, it's not a technology, because you can, maybe there's like federated learning and there's like privacy preserving ways of doing it. But it's a question of each enterprise coming together as a consortium. So that hasn't happened a lot as we would have expected it. But for a lot of the startup companies, pooling data is extremely valuable. So they would work with enterprises if there's a way to pool data. And in many cases, it's not technology, it's getting companies together, it's trusting each other to pull the data. But arguably, data is more valuable, and it makes sense for enterprises to figure out how to pull the data together. But
so Vijay, there's a bunch of questions here about kind of where the money's going. So I'm going to let you pop through a couple slides, and then Carter, I'll bring you up next, and a few others, because I do think everybody wants to see your sort of view of the landscape here.
Yeah, so where we're seeing a lot of capital go is towards enterprise infrastructure. And you can see the number of deals have decreased, but the funding has increased. So a few companies, especially the model building companies, whether it's text or it's video, have raised a lot of capital. Honestly, it's because you're competing with the giants. You need to have better algorithms, better compute, better data. And so we're seeing a few companies raise a lot of capital. So this is roughly where the capital is being allocated. This won't be the same in the next 5 to 10 years. Right now, it's copilots, it's AI assistant, a lot of the marketing and sales spaces, the low-hanging fruit, as you will. And then we're seeing a lot of photo editing and audio and text and more generational models which are being created. I think what we are seeing, just from taking a cynical perspective, is we're at the peak of the hype cycle. This happens every few years. There's been so much hype, not just from the press, but also from valuations and also from investments. And that will change over time. And we're seeing hundreds, if not thousands, of companies I think probably it's in the order of like more than thousands. It's like tens of thousands of startups in GenAI. Some of them are old school companies which are calling themselves GenAI. But a lot of these are ground up GenAI native startups. For example, every accelerator, more than half the cohort is GenAI startups. Half the VC funding for large funds is going towards GenAI startups. So we're seeing a frenzy of companies, some very specialized, some more technical than others. And in most cases, we're actually seeing that they're using a technology and then finding nails to go and use the use cases. And I think this is where it's very helpful for us as Mayfield to partner with the CXOs, because in many cases, we are seeing the same nails over and over again, and maybe there's not a big market for that. The question for us is like, how do we collaborate with you to figure out which ones are important, which ones are not, and what's the order of battle? And that's one more question is, a lot of these are scraping the web, using OpenAI, and then trying to figure out how to create a business model around it. But on the flip side, we intuitively know that this is a very large market. So historically, it's been data scientist proving value, and then going to data analyst, and then IT, and then eventually to business user. But in this cycle, we're seeing a very interesting way that business users are pulling in a lot of the GenAI use cases. And as you go from data science to business user, there's an order of magnitude more people, and you're getting closer to some of the budgets. So the TAMs are much larger than before. So if you're a sales automation company, we're seeing that it's a bigger TAM than startups could eventually address. Secondly, we're seeing that in the past, you had to build enterprise applications very tailored towards one persona, whether it's a product company or sales company. The data sources you tie into for a sales was very different than what you would do for marketing. But now with some of the GenAI use cases, we're actually seeing cutting across different use cases, different budgets within enterprise, different personas, and maybe even different documents to code and documents to CRM. So at the edges, we're seeing really, really innovative solutions from startups. And that's what's exciting for us is there was no parallel in the past, because now a product marketing person can read code just as easily as he can read documents. And this is interesting for us is we're seeing a bimodal distribution of fundraising. Some startups with just a couple of $1 million can use GenAI, get to an MVP really quickly because you're using open source tools or you're using publicly available data sets. On the flip side, if you have to create your own model, you have to raise a lot more. These are like 20, 30, 40 million seed raises before you can start selling anything. So we're seeing that bifurcating quite a bit, where companies have to build models versus companies which are just taking things to market. And we're excited to invest in both. I mean, text is probably oversubscribed right now in terms of number of companies building text, but video is open, images, music. These are all very interesting areas for us to invest in. And last but not the least is, it's very, very interesting to see how this emergent behavior is being manifesting as model size become bigger. And so we're keeping an open mind as OpenAI and as the companies that raise a few $1 billion are scaling the models up. We're always tracking this emergent behavior to see if it unlocks new use cases. And so this is us looking into, hey, what is new now, which wasn't there before, and what use cases can it deliver? And I think working with you would help us understand, like, hey, which nail to go after. This is just a rough framework for, on the architecture side, we have mapped the existing 400 to 500 startups into different horizontals and different verticals, and we're giving them a green, yellow, red score internally to figure out which ones do we want to focus on, which ones we don't want to focus on. So we're tracking a lot of different pieces of the enterprise infrastructure stack, as well as the application stack. And this is one mental model for us as we look at companies we want to invest in. We looked at RAGs and maybe even things which are upcoming, like agents, and how do agents work with other agents. So we have some hypotheses on how the market will develop and how enterprises might use them. But it's changing so fast that these are not strong opinions strongly held, but these are opinions we have, and anytime we see some new breakthroughs, we change those opinions. But we are opinionated on how the stack is going to develop in the future. And
so maybe with that, we can have some questions asked to you here, Vijay. Carter, I opened your mic. You were asking about the LLM app market, so maybe you can chime in here on what your question is.
Yeah, thanks, Vijay. Good presentation. This is Carter. I'm with Workato, and it seems like every software company is in a race to hook up their software apps to OpenAI as the LLM. Do you see, like, for example, you have software for CRM and ERP and for procure to pay and for HRIS. Do you see a world where there's specific LLMs we plug our business processes into, not just OpenAI, but very specific LLMs that are being built?
Yeah, so I think that's a very interesting way of the world for us is eventually every endpoint will have some kind of an agent, whether it's CRM, whether it's from Salesforce. And in fact, a lot of the open source community is building some of these agents. And we see a world at some point where these agents start communicating with each other, right? Whether it's, we don't have the frameworks yet for that, but maybe your sales agent might be communicating with your marketing agent. And so we're looking very closely at startups which will enable that. We're also tracking what the larger cloud companies are doing in this space. But we do see a world where there is going to be this communication between agents and between different bots in an enterprise, maybe natural language.
Steve, you had a question about aggregation. Why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, so I was just curious from when you talk about data and the value of this is all going to be accuracy and data, is there an opportunity for kind of mashing and consolidation, aggregation of data that could be a mid-market kind of player in this entire ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think for us, as we look at competition, or at least competitive moats for some of our startups, if you can scrape the web and you're using an open source model, the question is like, what is your moat really, right? Is it at least it's not in the technology or it's not in the data? Then we encourage the startups to think about how do you get access to private pockets of data, and these are pockets of data which might not be available. And there's companies in the genomic space or in the healthcare space which are trying to aggregate some of these data sources, but this requires extremely working with the different players in that ecosystem to be able to share data. And in many cases, it's the business models might not encourage them from sharing data with other companies, right? And there's some amount of mistrust. And we've seen this in automotive, we've seen this in healthcare. Data sharing has not been as easy given privacy issues and concerns and so on. But yes, we absolutely like if there's pockets of data outside of the enterprises and startups can access them.
Great. Savitha, you're asking a question maybe to the rest of us who are attending here, kind of what are the primary use cases? But Vijay, just from a CIO perspective, where are you seeing sort of the demand? Where do you think things will deploy? She's asking, for instance, around SecOps, that she's getting demand from her customers as well. And Savitha, I've opened your mic if you want to further your question.
Yeah. Thanks, Camille. Hi, Vijay. Yeah. So one of the areas we're working with a lot of Fortune 100 CIOs on is where's the kind of immediate opportunity, if you will. And, so the disciplines that we're looking at is really SecOps, DevOps, certainly in code generation, that's another area. In analytics, in data analytics, can I do some joins, faster than humans can for some quick ad hoc analysis? So those are some examples of areas we're looking at, but where in classic IT functions, where should we look for time to value leveraging GenAI?
Yeah, so I think those are very similar spaces we are also seeing. I think a lot of the use cases we're seeing is, at least from a non-IT standpoint, is back office, right? People are not willing to get this into the front office because there's issues with having a human in the loop. But in the back office itself, we are starting to see like helping software developers become more productive. That's on the code completion standpoint. We're seeing a lot of companies. In fact, we've invested in a couple of SecOps companies where these are copilots for security operations or data operations. At this point, it's still the copilot stage. We have 2 companies in that space which are doing this. We're also seeing in terms of how do you search through code, like Jira tickets and customer support, maybe level 1, level 2 to start with as copilots, and then eventually level 4, level 5. And previously couldn't get to higher levels, but now there's companies trying to get that. There's also companies which are trying to connect different data sources within IT and extract insights from that. But a lot of the things you said is where the low-hanging fruit is right now. We're starting to see, at least our job is to find what's 5 years out, and we're starting to see agents being used. But that's, again, not in the near term, but 5 years out or 6 years out.
Hey, Nathan, I opened your mic as well. You've got a couple questions here. And Anand, you had a question as well. I'll let you both sort of jump in. If either of you wants to talk. Nathan, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I just sent you a note. I'd stipulate, but I will follow up with a question, which is, and Opinder just basically asked it
I saw it too.
in a summary perspective, which is, I'm looking at an enterprise right now where we've deployed Claude to our entire company. Everyone's using it for summary and query-based use. We don't really need to go much further than that because the SaaS stack we use, at least as far as we understand it, we don't use Microsoft Office here, but the rest of our SaaS stack here is releasing IAI over the next, say, 6 months in rapid fashion, which basically means that we're a company that we won't need to invest in generative AI beyond, again, some basic Claude licenses that we have paid for. So the real question I have is, where is this profit coming from that's expected to dominate the market? Because other than people that are buying, say, ChatGPT 4 licenses for their enterprise, and or people that are licensing OpenAI engines, the rest of this is relatively off-the-shelf free. And so I'm having difficulty, like, looking at our total expenditures for AI, and in 2024 it'll be less than $1,000 for a company of 100. So I guess I'm just trying to understand where you see these spikes coming from in terms of what the market will get to cost-wise. But if that's too complicated, I guess, of a question, you can defer.
No, I think it's a fair question, Nathan. I think
Fair question. Yeah.
One way to look at this is a lot of the costs, I think people are still trying to figure out, at least startups we're looking at, is will customers pay for this extra features or not? Because it's costing them quite a bit. I think people are in ideation phase right now, but actually when they go into production, the OpenAI costs are going to add up pretty significantly, right? Even though they're trying to reduce the cost to do this API calls, it's pretty high. So I think what we're seeing is they're trying to see if they can pass it to customers. Unfortunately, right now it's being subsidized, right? It's being subsidized by either it's venture capital or just the business models. For example, Microsoft Copilot is like $30, and GitHub might be losing money on everything they offer. So I think people are still trying to figure out, will people pay for this additional features, right? Obviously, there's some productivity gains, which it's hard to monitor, it's hard to quantify at this point, maybe in some verticals, but the question is, are budgets going to increase, or where is the budget going to come from?
Yeah, another question from Ju, sort of on the same path. I just opened your mic there as well. It says, I don't think most enterprises can afford to build their own. So maybe you can open to your point there, Ju, on what else you'd like to share on that.
Yeah, I think so, at Palo Alto Networks, we have been working very closely with the OpenAI and Google for the last year at the beginning. And we have done close to 100 different types of projects so far. A couple of big takeaways, LM as of today, as Vijay mentioned, are still extremely expensive. Whether you pay OpenAI API or tokens, or you use open source to host your own LM internally, you need the expertise, you need the infrastructure, very expensive. However, I think it happened probably 5 months ago. A new way is emerging to really addressing, I think, a broader enterprise demand, like most enterprise, like Palo Alto Networks, like we cannot give our data to OpenAI, period. However, we want to benefit from the magic power of LLM. Then how can we work together? And, and also OpenAI, the model is frozen model, right? It's frozen in 2022, a typical day, which means any knowledge after that, you cannot do anything. So with these two fundamental challenges, I think a couple of months ago, the new way, the short name called RAG, means retrieval augmented generation. And this model starts showing up, a couple of startups start showing up internally while exploring as well. Seems have a show potential to address both problems. Number one, each enterprise can still keep its own data without sharing to those big guys. Number two, with your proprietary data, you can get to more real-time information and less hallucinated answers with this RAG approach, but leverage LLM at the same time. So based on all experiments done so far, this seems the most promising from the overall direction perspective.
I think you're right. So I think RAGs have been promising. We just invested in a company which does RAG. It's a team out of Stanford and professors and students. There's also new techniques around how do you update the LLM in real time. So we're looking at that space as well. So it's very, very exciting times to work with enterprises which don't want to share data outside, right? So you're right.
Hey, Vijay, do you have any more slides? Otherwise,
I think it's just I think there's a question about what can enterprises do. I think the stack is changing very quickly, and the budgets are different. The org designs are going to be different. I think having a very agile way of looking at your IT stack right now, and knowing that different teams and different roles are going to change. And last but not the least, we at Mayfield are investing maybe disproportionately in trust, safety, and regulations. So we'll announce some of the investments we're done, but that's going to be a huge issue going forward if you don't take it head on. So I'll pause here, Camille.
Great. So there's a bunch of questions. Keep the questions coming. But Isaac, let me bring you up. And Vijay, if you can stop share, Isaac can start to share. We've got, let's see, little more than 20 minutes left here. So stick with us. Keep the questions coming. But Isaac, if you can both reintroduce yourself and dive into your content, that'd be great. So
great. Gamio, can you confirm you see my slide?
Yes.
Yes. Awesome. Okay. Great to be here. Thanks, Gamio, for having me. And Vijay, it's great to meet you. You started off by talking about AI 1.0, and that puts me in the AI 0.1 version, going back to my grad school days where I was hand programming neural networks. My first startup, we were doing DNA analysis using vectors before there were vector databases, and then doing natural language processing with newspaper content going into the internet days. So brings me back into my early days. I've spent most of my career being a CIO and a CTO. I now run a company called StarCIO. We help companies with their digital transformation programs. But I do a lot of writing and speaking on the side, my 2 books, my blogs, my coffee hours on LinkedIn, and so forth. And what I want to do with everybody here, I mean, there's so much going on around AI and GenAI in particular. I want to play to the lens of the CXO and the CIO in particular, who for the first time is feeling the pressure from the top, the board asking and their executives asking for an AI strategy, in some cases expecting very quick results and getting really excited by what they see out in market and saying, how do we take advantage of these Gen AI capabilities? How do we get the productivity? How's it going to change our core products and services? And then on the bottom up, sort of like that, what was happening with mobile technologies 15 years ago, where Gartner said that was going to drive the consumerization of IT. And I believe that Gen AI is really going to deal with the consumerization of search, really how we're using all our unstructured content, all of our documents, and how do we make our employees more intelligent, but also our customers more intelligent with all that content that we have. So I want to build you up from the ground up from the start. There's a lot of capabilities in IT right now that can start leveraging Gen AI and AI capabilities. I've highlighted a couple of these. This is coming from a blog post I did a few months ago. But I think the first thing CIOs need to do is get a ground floor view of what people are experimenting with or want to experiment with. And I think in IT and in marketing, those are the two fruitful areas where there's just a lot of tools and platforms, built-in platform capabilities that you can take advantage of. The second thing is to start building out your guidance with your IT leaders, particularly when there's risk of sharing IP on public LLMs. That needs to be front and center from a risk perspective with CIOs. But then looking at, what are people doing with the tools that you already have that have built-in Gen AI capabilities? Every one of you have a tool, whether it's ServiceNow, whether it's Atlassian, Microsoft tools, Adobe tools. You have all these tools that are starting to build in point solutions or point capabilities and getting a narrowed, siloed view of your enterprise data. And now you can start using it for things like, answering a service desk call, or processing information, or doing information search within your Jira tickets. So there's a lot of quick and easy things to do. But then from a developer's perspective, a development perspective, starting not to think about building your own LLMs, but starting to think about, how do I make my data accessible to an LLM? And when you dive into that technology, you're going to see a lot about vector databases and embeddings. And what that's essentially doing is taking your information sources, compacting it down to a vector or a numerical type of information. Whether you do that yourself or you do that with tools as the tools mature, that's going to enable you to plug your data into either private or industry or open LLMs and start making really intelligent data around it. For CIOs, as we go up the stack and say, okay, what is my AI strategy? How do I present this? How do I think about putting this on paper? There's a couple things that I really think about there. Going from the bottom up, I think there's a number of companies that are already thinking about the data governance around this. Where can your IP get used? Where can it not be used? How do we accelerate improving data quality? And where are we setting some guardrails? Use these tools in these ways. I tell CIOs the most important thing is make sure that when your employees are experimenting, they're using tools that you've sanctioned, they're using data that you've sanctioned to use in those tools. Most importantly, they're exposing what problems and opportunities they're trying to solve for. There's a lot of tinkering and experimenting in areas that might not be providing value. And the real goal is to say, look, these are the problems in areas where Gen AI and learning about them might provide early value. So let's go experiment in these particular areas. One of the things CIOs in particular struggle with is communications. I think this is an area that really needs focus on, particularly at the board level, at the CEO level, where there's a lot of really accelerated expectations over what Gen AI can do for the business, but also what are some of the disruptive threats. So having a real clearly articulated AI strategy that you're going to update quarterly at every single board meeting, I think needs to be on everybody's radar. But then also communicating with customers and employees in terms of what you're experimenting with, where are some of the learning opportunities, and how you're going to get your organization ready to start taking and evaluating these tools.
Isaac, there's a question here. Sorry, there's a question here from Jason that speaks to your last point there, which is, how do you communicate some apprehension sort of concerns that maybe workforce has about how will this impact me, my role, et cetera? Any thoughts there, and anyone else who can chime in on best practices they've employed as well? So, and Jason, I've opened your mic if you want to ask more specifics.
Yeah, Isaac, this is JJ.
Hi, JJ.
One of the questions, good to hear from you as always. We've talked about people-centric funds. We've talked about the importance of investing in this space. We've talked about all the pressures coming down from the executive suite to make this happen. But there's real apprehension at the workforce level, right? And if you are a CIO, how do you get ahead of that? How do you pitch this to a workforce that in some ways what we're doing may ultimately replace their jobs?
Yeah, look, we've had this struggle every time there's been a technology that moves up stack and starts challenging the types of things employees are doing, whether it's robotic process automation, whether it's low-code technologies taking away software developers' jobs. There's always a layer of technology that we continue to go up stack on. And the CIO formula around this is simple to say and hard to execute. It's really about bringing people together, making some reasonable projections over what people will be doing with technologies over the next 6 to 18 months. What's the art of the possible that you're going to make available to your organization? And then here's the hard part, really thinking through what people's jobs are going to look like when that surfaces and what you need to train and prepare people to do differently. So when I think about, for example, software developers, I think over the next few years, we're going to see software developers query for code more than code. And I think that has huge benefits in terms of the amount of tech debt that we create, in terms of code reuse. But that's a different mindset to an architect who really likes coding, who really likes solving problems. And it's a very different mindset and opportunity for your average developer who needs to be able to evaluate code that comes out of a code generator and say, you know, how do I plug this in? And is it really solving my problem? And is it introducing some new issues that I need to contend with? So every time we introduce a new technology, we need to move up stack, and we need to really rethink what people will be doing over the next 12 to 24 months as it matures. This slide is coming from another CIO article I did. This is really about thinking through your digital transformation priorities, what AI is going to do in terms of your priorities. And what, like I said, when I say game-changing LLM strategy, that's really thinking 2, 3, 4 years down the road. And I'm thinking about industries, healthcare, education, anywhere where you have large corpuses of intellectual property that has probably been untapped over the years because you've been focused on relational data and doing analytics and doing 1.0 machine learning off of it. And now all of a sudden you can start saying, hey, we can start prompting against these data sources and start saying what we can do with these things. So I think the first thing CIOs really need to do is project where their intellectual property is going to offer advantages and where that's going to play out in their industry. So I think you have to look a few steps past where we are today and work your way backwards. If you want something real and present, that's customer facing, I think customer support is a very interesting area to focus on. And that's because there's a ton of information there that your standard customer support agent normally doesn't have access to. And we start bringing in more of their context about what they're typing in on a support ticket or what they're reviewing on a website. Start building up that knowledge, not from a data, but now from a prompting perspective. How do you help your agents ask questions and get real answers to provide back to customers? So I think that's going to be an area of very short-term opportunities for most companies using prompting and LLMs in the customer support angle. And then, you know, when you think about going into the future, reevaluate your decision-making authorities, you know, this notion that AI is going to take over humans and do all the decisions for you is out there, JJ. This is what people are afraid of. And the answer really comes down to figuring out where decision-making authorities really lie and how anything from machine learning to LLMs are going to aid them to make smarter and faster decisions.
So there's an interesting comment here, Isaac, from Raju about micro-credentials. And I love the concept, Raju. I don't know if you want to, maybe you're experimenting with this or you've got a point of view to share.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Now, with this rapidly changing pace of technologies, you know, organizations are really trying to figure out how much employees can learn. From an organization point of view, what they should learn. From an individual employee point of view, you know, there is a plethora of learning all around. Where do they invest their time for learning, in which areas? So it's kind of, let's say, a chaotic kind of a place out there.
Yep.
Also, the standard ways of learning, which are like the standard bachelor's, master's, and different kinds of degrees, are there, but you know they really don't cater to this kind of a rapid change. So how are even universities adapting to this kind of a change? And so that is one part of the question. The second part is, how is AI actually being used in order to create new kinds of personalized learning for those you know, in both in academia as well as industry?
Yeah, I'm going to unpack that. I think there's probably 3 questions there.
Yeah.
In terms of employees and learning, this can seem chaotic. And in some ways, I think we want to have a little bit chaos in terms of giving people freedom, maybe freedom to ask the right questions, but putting some governance in terms of, it's a great question. Do we really want to invest time answering it? And if we're going to answer it, what are the tools and what are the data that you should have access to be able to really put your time and energy around this? So I think you want to open up the floor to your employees to ask a lot of questions, and then start narrowing it down and saying, let's apply our learning activities in these channel areas. Let's provide some tooling around how you can collaborate, how you can share your learnings. But most importantly, put some structure around the data and tools people are using to do their experiments, because it's just too easy right now for people to just access tools and start playing with things and make some mistakes. I think it's more around that sort of ideation work we've done in the past. Start with a wide funnel and narrow it down and saying, this is where we want to spend our time. I think education is really going to hit a lot of disruptive factors. It should have over the last few years. I think the pandemic was a spark around this in terms of how people are learning virtually, and to some extent what people are willing to pay for education. And now I think when you think about the education of the future, it's going to be about not only prompting, right? We moved from memorizing to searching. Now we're going to move from searching to prompting. And how do we really establish the creative exercises that are going to create the next generation of, we went from digital natives, we're going to start seeing our AI natives come into the workforce probably in 10 years, and it's going to change everything that we're doing. So when I think about professors, when I think about higher ed education, I think about textbook publishers, they need to turn their models around and say, well, how are we going to take advantage of this technology instead of a linear learning model and a searching learning model, a prompting model. Game, I just
So
want
there's
to
a question.
quickly,
Sorry, here question here from Lindsay, just on the trust and safety. And I wonder, Lindsay, if I've opened your mic, sort of the balance between moving fast and moving securely. And we're gonna run out of time here in the next few minutes. And I'm also curious, both you, Isaac, and Vijay, if in addition to answering Lindsay's question here, talk a little bit about what came out of the White House yesterday and some of these regulations and how might we consume those both on the startup side and the enterprise level. So Lindsay, your mic's open if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think, I had some interesting conversations with some of our customers recently, and my takeaway right now, and also just other reports where the challenges, there's a lot of opportunity, but most, as you're pointing out, CIOs and CISOs are like, hold our horses here. And so there's real concerns around this from both from a security side, but I also think this sort of broader trustworthy aspects around, why is it giving me the answer it is? Is it being fair? Is it biased? Concerns around hallucination. And, if not done right, you lose human. You're going to not promote human. You're going to have the counter effect of promoting human machine teaming, so to speak here. So I'm just seeing like there's just a really dynamic space around the tools to support kind of quote unquote guardrails. They're not mature really. And yet I see them as a critical part. And so I'm just curious to get, all of your takes on sort of how you kind of see this space evolving in that context, the tools and tool vendors and that the tool chains around that. And like I said, and I think too, the intersection with data governance, because one of my takeaways is that they kind of almost have to deal with data governance before they can deal with AI governance, or at least it makes more sense if you do it that way, but they're still grappling with that. So just your comments or reflections on that would be appreciated.
Yeah, a really, really, really good question. I mean, I think the one thing we have to learn from the past is saying no and locking out employees from doing anything in this space is probably a recipe for disaster. The hard thing is getting ahead of the velocity of your executives and your employees and saying, here's the playgrounds, the problems, and who and how to collaborate. So I think finding some good fruitful areas and saying, let's focus here, I think is the first stage there. I agree with you. there's a lot to be thinking about, the lack of explainability, the lack of attribution that these LLMs are doing today. I think about when we do, machine learning, we do analytics, we know how to create synthetic data sets. We know how to do automated testing around it. We can start seeing how the boundaries work. There's still a lot of technology and know-how and skill to be able to do that. But those tools don't exist for LLMs yet. So when we create an LLM with whatever level of expertise is, where does its boundaries begin and end in terms of what questions it could legitimately answer? We don't have a good way of doing this, and certainly not at a scalable way. So I think that needs to be at the top of mind when you start thinking about the equivalent of model ops. Now we're going to start talking about LLM ops. Is this particular LLM with this data ready for production use, or what level of production use? I don't know what we've seen, OpenAI do and what Google is doing, and say, let's just open it up and see what people do and start cutting back when we start hitting problems. I don't know if that works in the enterprise. So I think you have to take it slow. We start looking at how to use your IP for competitive advantage. Think about the data governance side of it and making your IP ready for vectorization, for embeddings when LLMs are ready, and then when there's actual good technology to do validation. Great question.
So Isaac and Vijay, if you're still there, weigh in on the White House rules out of yesterday.
Yeah, I think from our standpoint and investment standpoint, this is a very exciting space to invest in. We're looking at data ops quite heavily, PII data, access control, data ops from the data side standpoint. From the model standpoint, it's how do you score a model? How do you red team, blue team a model? How do you add guardrails to a model? How do you reduce hallucinations? So these are all very, very exciting investment opportunities for us to address some of these issues. And we think it's an evolving space where regulations will change, and eventually maybe we have to offer insurance, maybe we have to offer some kind of protection for enterprises, right? So those are very dynamic and very interesting challenges, but I can only imagine enterprises have to react to this, and I think startups will try to address a lot of these issues.
Yeah,
Isaac,
I think the good news here is that government is getting involved. I think what we saw yesterday is pretty lightweight first step in terms of creating a directory. I think the technology company should be open to doing that. And, like Vijay said, I think, as the government learns more, in the back of their heads, they want to make sure that people in the country is safe, that our intellectual property is safe. But at the same time, just like every enterprise, we can't sit back. Our adversaries are going to be implementing these technologies with less regulation and scruples around it. So they need to keep the innovation going, but they need to start learning what government functions should look like as the capabilities get exported out.
Richard, I opened your mic. You had a very snappy sort of summary. I wonder if you wanted to share. Richard?
Oh yeah, I hit that by accident. Sorry, Gamil. I think we're out of time, unfortunately, but I think this is a great segue to perhaps a future topic, and that is open source versus closed source on AI and models. I was kind of cheeky in my comment there. Was the I don't know if you guys read the Neuron. I'm sure many of you do. They had a quote in there this morning that the basic summary of yesterday's activities was that you can bake the cake and just make it safe to eat, but you don't have to disclose your recipe. I think that's where we left yesterday's sessions. We're still in a place of closed black boxes where no one knows what's in there and what fed it and how it was learned. So we've got opportunity there for sure.
Vijay, any reaction to the recipe build there?
No, I think it's going to be a cat and mouse game for the next few years. I think US, and then it's going to be Europe, and start tracking your models is hard enough, and now tracking models and regulations is going to be quite as fun.
Yeah, Gamey,
well,
I'll just say
thank you everybody thank you everybody for joining today. We are at the top of the hour. I'm always very sensitive to not overstepping my time with you. So thank you so much for spending time with us. As I suggested at the beginning, we have recorded this. We'll share content. Shelby and I will be sending out sort of a summary takeaway. Isaac, thank you so much for spending time with us. Vijay, thank you as well. And thank you all for the great questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody. and happy to hear questions from anybody and suggestions on next topics as well. But we are going to continue this conversation in other conversations or other events coming forward as well. So thank you again, everybody. Have a great day. Happy Halloween to everybody who's celebrating. Take care. Bye.
See you. Bye.
Thanks, King Kimo.